Thank you, Anna. I would like to let you know of the next 3 forums that we'll be having. Next Friday, we will be hearing from President and Diane Wilcox, and it will be basically a virtual trip to Africa and many of the lessons that they learn there. There'll be music. There'll be a lot of great things. So that's next Friday. The following Friday, we will hear from Dave Checketts. Dave Checketts and Tom Christofferson, and that's President Christofferson's brother. And that subject will be That We May Be One, a Gay Mormon's Perspective on Faith and Family. And we really look forward to that. And then the following, we will be hearing from Elder and Sister Dudley, which is our area authority for here in Virginia. And I've heard them speak, and they are wonderful. So we really hope to have you with us the next 3 Fridays at Convocation. So we are finishing up Healthy Relationships Week. And part of that is to highlight our Title IX office so that we can have a safe, healthy, emotionally and romantically healthy campus. And I wanted to briefly introduce the Title IX staff that work so hard to help make our campus safe. So if I could have the 4 Title IX interns and Michael Fry, please come up to the stage really quick. I want you to know who they are. Come on up. So Michael Fry serves as the Assistant Title IX Coordinator, and I am the Title IX Coordinator. And Olivia Eckbert, Laurie Crockett, Adam Jensen, and Hannah Allred are all interns in the Title IX office and do a great deal with training and many of the activities that we have put on this week. It's important that if you ever have something that you need to talk about, you go directly to myself or Michael, but you can also go to the interns, and they won't handle any of the discussions or investigations, but they can always help you get to the right place. So I also would like to introduce, if he's here, Jacob Smith, our Director of Security. If Jacob could come up. So Jacob and I work very closely together, and he is always someone that you can turn to and always someone that can find answers for you. So please know that all these individuals on the stage are here to help you. Thank you. We now have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Ariel Rodriguez. He received his PhD in family life and his master's degree in family science. Ariel is married to the lovely Ann. They have 3 children that are all Southern Virginia graduates, and we decided to shorten his intro so that you could hear from him. Following Dr. Rodriguez, John Leake will give the invocation after our closing in hymn. Thank you.
I'm excited to be here and talk to all of you today. For those of you who weren't here last year, I spoke on the forum before Valentine's Day, and the topic was, what is love? And I want to do a quick recap of that before I talk about new stuff today, because I think it'll be helpful and instructive. And hopefully I'm not going to fall off the podium, and I'm not going to go over time, and I'm not going to lose my clicker. So I don't know what that was. Okay, so recap, and I'm going to have to be turning around a lot because I don't have a monitor here or anything, but last time we talked... Is it the phone? Okay, I'm guessing it's the phone. That's the only thing I'm doing, so that works. Okay. All right. So in part 1, I talked about why it's important to understand what love is, why we want to answer that question. And basically what it boils down to is, if you grew up in a conservative home or a religious home, you probably learned a standard for when is it okay to have sex with people. And the standard you learned was probably when you're married, it's okay to have sex with people. But that's not the most common standard among young people today in America. The most common standard among young people today in America is the love standard, which goes like this. When is it okay to have sex with someone? When you're in love. When you're in love with them, it's okay, right? So this is a problem because it's kind of a fuzzy standard. I made a case last time for the idea that a lot of people wonder if they're in love, right, when they're feeling all those feelings. Nobody wonders if they're married, right? You don't wake up in the morning and go, am I really married? So it's not a thing that happens, right? So it's a kind of a fuzzy standard, and then also add into the mix the idea that there's a lot of really kind of confusing messages in love songs, in romantic comedies. You get a lot of really weird ideas about love and what it is and how it works. And so all of that leads to the idea that people make mistakes. People have regrets because they thought they were in love, and then they entered into a sexual relationship and they realized they never really were in love. So that's something that you could help people avoid, right? That was my argument last time, is if you understand what love is and you have a good handle on it, you can talk to some of your friends and help them to clarify, what love is, and maybe they won't make so many mistakes. Now, I have to pick on Taylor Swift again. I like Taylor Swift, don't get me wrong, but last time I used one of her songs as an example of really weird messages about love, and it just so happened that my daughter found out that I was speaking, and she emailed me. I don't know, I don't follow pop music, but she said Taylor Swift just came out with a new album, and there's a song on the album. She said, Dad, it's great. You've got to see it, and sure enough, I love this. Don't blame me. Love made me crazy. If it doesn't, you ain't doing it right. Lord, save me. My drug is my baby. I'd be using for the rest of my life. So imagine if you're a 13 or 14-year-old kid in America and you hear stuff like that about love, and that's what's informing your understanding of what it means to be in love, and then you grow up and you're a 16 or 17 or 18 or 19-year-old person who is then using that as a standard for when it's okay to engage in intimate sexual relationships, right? That's a problem. So anyway, the other thing we did was I tried to give some answers. I get you started on your quest to figure out what love is. And so we talked a little bit about answers that come from faith and answers that come from science. And I'll just give you two of the answers that come from faith really quickly. One of the questions I posed was, are there different types of love? And if so, what are they? And in the scriptures, the only point I made was that the scriptures seem to point us to one kind of love, which is charity, which is the same kind of love I'm going to have for my neighbor, for my enemies, for my spouse. There's no differentiation there, right? So it's something to think about as you go trying to figure out what love is. Another question that I had posed was, not so much a question, but it's just this myth that we have that young people have that, if we're in love, that's all we need, we can make it work. There's a lot of love songs that say that. And I shared at least one quote. I don't know if I'm doing that. I apologize if I am. But I shared at least one quote from a general authority, from a prophet of the LDS Church, who said, married couples, in order to be successful, need to be determined, unselfish, and righteous. So love isn't the only thing you need. There's other things you need to make a relationship work. Okay, let's go on. So answers from science. So we talked about a lot of different things, and I'm just going to just really quickly go through them. Attraction. So there's a lot of scientists who study attraction. What is it that makes you attracted to someone? And what's going on in your brain when you're attracted to someone? And so I went over some of that research. Here's some things we know. Proximity and frequency are important factors in determining whether you will feel attracted to someone. So, for example, proximity. You're more likely to fall in love with someone who sits close to you in the class than someone who sits 5 rows away. We had research showing that, right? You're more likely to fall in love with someone in the ward you're in here and in the classes you're in than someone who's not, things like that. So the more frequency is the other part of the equation. It's the kind of person that you see on a regular basis. Those are the kind of people that you're more likely to be attracted to. I talked about mutual eye gazing and self-disclosure, and I made this very bold statement based on a study that in a laboratory setting, social scientists can significantly increase the likelihood that you might feel attracted to a random stranger, which is 34 minutes of this kind of activity, having you do self-disclosure and look into people's eyes. So it's just kind of, okay, it's magical. It's a magical feeling, but scientists can reproduce it in a lab. So these are things that we need to think about, and honestly, that's part of my approach last time, was to deconstruct the magic of it all, right? One other thing that we talked about was this idea that women in particular use their sense of smell to determine attractiveness of a male, right? So they will talk about, they'll lean in close to a guy and go, oh, he smells good, but the idea there is What they're smelling is the interesting thing. What they're smelling is the guy's genetic mutation load and his genetic compatibility with her as a potential reproductive mate, right? Which is just a kind of a weird thing. But again, we've got a lot of research showing that that's really what's going on, right? So attraction, right? It's not what you thought it was. I talked a lot about neurotransmitters in the brain, so dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin. These are neurochemicals that are associated with those feelings of attraction. And one of the points I made was that they work kind of like when you're taking amphetamines. It's a similar experience. You're going to feel euphoria and elation. You might have trouble sleeping at night. You might feel a strong sense of craving or obsession over the thing that you desire. All these things are very similar. So being in love, I try to make the case that it's kind of like that kind of attraction love. It's kind of like being on drugs. I also talked about another kind of love that, there's an attraction kind of love and there's an attachment kind of thing. Attraction is a short-term thing. You might have that wonderful feeling of euphoria, and it might last for months or maybe even a couple of years, but then it fades. Attachment is the one that lasts longer. It's the one that lasts indefinitely, right? So it's the one probably that you really want to have in a marriage, right? So attachment love is associated with certain hormones, right? Endorphins are a category of hormones, and then oxytocin. I talked about both of those and how they're associated with this feeling of, I must be, it's because I'm too close to the other mic, probably. Okay. I'm going to stand more, I'm going to fall off the podium. Anyway, so endorphins and oxytocin are going to produce feelings of security and peace and connection, emotional connection to people. And that's a different kind of experience than the attraction thing. Euphoria versus peace and security, right? Anyway, so conclusions. How do you help other people? First of all, I think you can talk to them about the standards and how the marriage standard is a little bit clearer than the love standard. But if they don't go for that, if they don't want to change their standard, then you can help them to clarify what the love standard is. You can emphasize the long-term goal, attachment, right? You want that attachment kind of love in your relationship, right? You can talk about the difference between attraction and attachment and how if they're feeling that attraction kind of love, that might not be the love that's going to get them through everything, right? I talked about the importance of valuing. There's nothing wrong with feeling raise your hand right now if you're kind of goofy in love. Let's see. I'm just curious. Okay, it's happening, right? It's a great feeling. There's nothing wrong with it, and I think there's a lot to learn from it. But you need to be careful, right? Because what happens to your grades if you're not careful when you're goofy in love? They tank, right? So there's things you got to be careful about. And it's the same thing with attachment. I talked a little bit about how oxytocin can help you to start feeling really strongly connected to someone, even if they're not a good person or they're not really good for you or things like that. So there was some reason to be concerned for both of these. But anyways, here we go, part 2. And my phone, hang on a second. I just want to see where I'm at. Okay, so let's keep going here. Attraction is short-term, as I said. Attachment is indefinite, right? You can last indefinitely. So how do you go from mutual attraction to a healthy attachment, right? And more importantly, how do you make that last indefinitely, right? How do you build a relationship where you're going to have that attachment feeling for the rest of your life? That's what I want to talk to you about today. And I have 5 principles I want to share with you. I could have had 6 or 10 or 20, I don't know, but I think 5 sounded like a good number in terms of how much time I have. I like talking about things that could help people with relationships, but I tried to come up with 5 that were related to love. So here we go. The first one is acceptance of differences. Oh, boy. No, that's them. Let's go on. Here we go. Acceptance of differences. So, yes, I love this little meme. Marriage lets you annoy one special person for the rest of your life, right? Yeah, that's good stuff. So time for a little bit of dream crushing here. Women's love is forward-focused. Let's talk about that. So researchers have examined college women and college men's notions of love and how they experience love when they're in love and where they focus their energy and their effort. So college women are more likely to think forward, like I got this guy and we're in love and everything's great, but she looks forward to the future when things will be better, and she invests and hopes to enjoy that future more. Whereas college men are more likely to be thinking about the moment. They're more likely to be thinking about like, everything's good the way it is, let's just keep it the way it is now, right? And they enjoy love now more. Women will think of the future love and look to that. So what it leads to is that women are more likely to have this idea that maybe I can fix him. Now, men do that too, right? So there might be some guys in the audience who are in a relationship thinking they can fix the girl, right? But it's more likely that women do this. I'm in a relationship, but and he's got some problems, but I can fix this, right? So now I got some bad news for you if that's you. If I just described you in a relationship, then here's the bad news. The bad news is there are solvable and unsolvable problems in every single relationship, okay? So research shows that 70% of the things that married couples fight about are actually unsolvable problems. You cannot fix them by talking about them. You cannot fix them by having a conflict or anything. They're just part of the marriage, right? Now, some of you might be going, okay, what's an unsolvable problem? I will give you an example from my early marital life that I thought was a thing that we needed to fix. I am a morning person. My wife is a night person, right? And it created problems in our ability to live together and have a schedule and all these kinds of things. But the truth is, talking about it wasn't going to fix it. And it isn't really a solvable problem. It's kind of the context of my marriage, right? I don't even want to think of it as an unsolvable problem because that makes it sound bad, like something that, my marriage has a problem. More accurately, it's just the context of my marriage, right? So here we go. 70%, I already said that. Am I crushing your dreams yet? Okay. Have I crushed any dreams? Why don't you... Yeah, let's do this. Would you please, if you are currently engaged, would you please stand up? Just stand if you're engaged. Okay, I got a bunch of people here. All right, good job. Okay. So, there's a couple right there. I don't want to know. We don't want a couple. Let's go over here. No. Hang on. You gotta the mic. I'm not even gonna mess with the mic. I'm just gonna ask her. So, are you? I've crushed your dreams today? No. Okay. She says no. Okay. What if there were some secret I could tell you that could help you get rid of 70% of the conflict that's going to happen in your marriage? Would you be interested in that?
Yes, definitely.
She says yes. She wants to know, what can you do to get rid of 70% of the conflict in your marriage? I will tell you, the answer's at the top of the PowerPoint. You can learn to accept differences. So I'm not crushing your dreams. I'm helping you to dramatically improve your relationship, whether you're married or engaged or just in a dating relationship. If you can start understanding that your goal isn't to fix everything, but to actually fix the things that are fixable, right? So the idea here is, the bright side. Okay, so I already did the bright side. Marrying a particular set of, let's talk about that for a moment. Gosh, if you're engaged, if you're thinking about marrying someone, how many of you are maybe like in that point where like, we're not engaged, but we're getting close, right? Are there any hands for that one? If you're thinking it, you can't raise your hand on that one because if the other person doesn't raise their hand, they're in trouble. But okay, let's just think about this. If you're thinking about marrying someone, what you got to be thinking in your head is, if I marry Fred, I'm marrying a particular set of unsolvable problems. And so the real question I got to be asking myself is, do I love Fred enough to live with this particular set of unsolvable problems, right? And if you can do that, then when you marry that person, you can accept differences and a bunch of the conflicts are just going to go away, right? You will learn to live together and you'll grow together and you'll be happier, right? So healthy relationships are not about solving all your problems. Healthy relationships are about solving solvable problems. There are problems in your marriage that you can solve by talking about them, and those you should talk about. But 70% of them are going to be unsolvable problems, or as I say, the context of the relationship. So The key, here's another, this is an idea that comes from a researcher named John Gottman, who's like the leading researcher on marital conflict. And a lot of the stuff I've been talking about comes from him. I really like this guy. So anyway, he says, accepting differences is the key to all conflict resolution. He says, you need to communicate to your spouse that you accept her, and he uses the word love. And I realized after I already made the PowerPoint that accept was in parentheses. He says that you love her the way she is, including her personality, right? So acceptance is a really important idea here that's going to help you to deal with conflicts. He says when you communicate that to your spouse, it knocks down barriers and it allows a lot better communication to happen, and it allows people to change and grow, and all kinds of wonderful things happen. So this is good stuff, right? Okay, so if we're going to accept differences, one of the things we need to do is we need to understand differences. So I just want to talk about a few key differences that I think are fun and worth talking about, right? First of all, there are differences that have to do with the family you grew up in or the culture that your family is in, right? But one example of this would be like the Loud family. How many of you grew up in the Loud family? Raise your hand if you grew up in the Loud family, right? Okay. Yeah, good for you. You people are loud and proud, right? Okay. So now here's the question. Have any of you people from the Loud family ever tried to date someone who was from the Quiet family? Okay, where did that go? That went nowhere. That was no good, right? I was like, stop yelling at me. I'm not yelling at you. I'm just talking. No, you're yelling. No, this is just my normal voice, right? That's not going to be good, right? So those kind of differences can really challenge a relationship. There's other kinds of differences too. Here we go. Expression of affection. How many of you grew up in a really huggy home? Lots of hugs and cuddling and all that stuff. And then you're trying to date someone who grew up in the home where like nobody touched anybody, right? And you're going to have problems. Let me tell you, you're going to have some serious problems there, right? Because expression of affection should be something that should be happening in your relationship, and you're going to have to work out how it's all going to work, right? Gender differences. There are some gender differences that seem pretty credible based on research. So here we go. Intimacy formation. Women more commonly use these conversational rituals to establish intimacy with each other, right? Women talk more about feelings and relationships, and they have these specific conversational rituals that they use to get close to people, right? One example would be the idea of what this researcher called troubles talk. I tell you one of my problems, right? And it's a way in which, and you can empathize and we can understand each other better. Like as I disclose a problem or a trouble I'm having, that helps us to draw closer together. And another aspect of that conversational ritual is this idea of matching experiences. So as a female, I tell you one of my problems, and then what do? The way the ritual works is you're supposed to tell me one of your problems. And in that way, we get closer together. We feel closer, right? Now, men don't do that. Men talk less about feelings and emotions. Men talk more about events and activities. That's what they do. And research suggests that men don't use conversation to create intimacy as much as women do. Men use shared activities, right? That's why, for example, maybe your boyfriend thinks that watching a movie on the TV is a date, right? He thinks that's a date because you guys are watching the same movie at the same time in the same room, so it's a shared activity and it means intimacy to him. And you're just going, no, we didn't have a date. We just watched a movie together. That's not anything, right? So, because there was no conversation, there was no opportunity to connect and get to know each other. So there's differences like that, right? That matter. Communication. Okay, so there are some, I guess this is very similar to we're still on the same kind of topic, basically, with the same researcher. Communication. Men, okay, so one of the things that women will do that I was just saying is this idea of troubles talk. So imagine poor Dr. Rodriguez in the early months of his marriage. His wife comes and tells him some trouble she's having. And he does this typical male thing. He gives her a solution, tells her how to fix her problem, right? Where does that go? That's going nowhere. Let me tell you, that's not the right thing to do. She was looking to create some connection and closeness with me through this conversational ritual that she's been practicing all her life, and I did the guy thing, right? I just, here's the answer, here's the solution, if you're having that problem, why don't you try this? Okay, great. Yeah. So these are problems. This is normative. This is pretty normal. If it's happening to you, you should understand these are the kinds of things that happen in relationships. And this, yeah. Anyway, let's go on. Conflict resolution. Okay. There's compelling evidence showing, physiologically, that men have more trouble managing verbal conflict than women do. Men will more quickly and easily hit the fight or flight point where they're overwhelmed by nobody's hitting each other or anything. We're just like a husband and a wife having a conflict, and his heartbeat will be going like 115 beats a minute, and hers will be cruising along at like 82, right? She's just fine. Yeah, I'm fine with this conversation. And he's just like, woo. So men are more likely to withdraw. Now, they don't necessarily get up and run away, but they might like just close down on you in the middle of a conversation. They'll just be like, cross their arms, turn sideways, start looking over here when they talk, and everyone wants to look back at you. And so they'll do these things that kind of like help them to manage their physiological response. And women perceive that as, he doesn't care, and he's closing down on me. And here I am trying to have this talk about our relationship to get things better, and he's just pulling away more, right? So there's these problems like this in communication that have to do with gender differences, right? Let's go on. Number 2, practice mindful optimism to keep your love alive. Let's see how I'm doing on time. Maybe we'll see what happens. Okay. That cat. Oh, that cat is great. Negative sentiment override. Okay, so this is stuff that comes from John Gottman. He has this idea that, he's got good at research to back it up, but when there's problems in a relationship, when there's unresolved conflicts in a relationship, the negativity from that unresolved conflict can spill over into other aspects of the relationship. Maybe you have fights about the money and how to spend the money and things like that, but after a while, the negativity there starts to spill over into other issues. And you're talking about, your mom's coming over to visit for the weekend and you got to go run to the store and get this or that or whatever, and suddenly you're having a fight about money, right? And maybe you're talking about like, what you're gonna, what you guys should eat for lunch on Sunday, and suddenly you're having a fight about money. It's like it starts to spill over into other areas, and it creates a lot of negativity, and you get this general. You just start to think of the relationship in a negative way. It starts to just like you have this global sense that I'm in a bad marriage, I'm in an unhappy marriage, I'm in a bad relationship, right? And once you get to that point, when you have that overall negative feeling, it starts to color everything that happens. So you're less likely to see good things that your partner's doing, and you're more likely to emphasize negative things, right? This is why sometimes there's been times now. And everybody does this. This isn't like and it doesn't have to be full blown like you think everything in the relationship is bad. Even in little ways, this happens in relationships. That the way you're feeling about the relationship globally impacts the particular interaction you're having right now. So some days you might be feeling really good about your relationship. Some days you might be feeling not so good, and that kind of stuff can really impact the relationship. The example I was going to give was, there's been times in my marriage when I was kind of in a foul mood and I said something really snarky to my wife that was kind of like a jab, and she kind of laughed and smiled and said, "Oh, you're so funny," and I was like, what just happened? That's just weird. And then there's been other times when I just think I'm Mr. Comedy and I'm trying to say something really funny to like lighten the mood in a tense moment, and I say, "Here's my little joke," or whatever, and she goes, "That's not funny," right? So, and I'm like, it depends. It depends on the person and where they're at in the relationship. So negative sentiment override. Anyway, so the idea there is the negative sentiment override can get so bad that you color everything negatively all the way back to the very beginning of your relationship. So even the story of how you first met and how you fell in love becomes colored by a negative perspective. I don't know what I ever saw in her in the first place. I should have known the first time we went on our date because this and this happened, and you got this very negative story, right? So let's talk about the opposite is positive sentiment override. So that there's the other process works too, right? If you have a very positive overall view of your relationship, then it starts to color everything you see, and you see the good that your spouse does, and you minimize the bad things that they're doing, and it allows you to see a very different kind of marriage, right? Now, the idea here is that you want to create positive sentiment override, and what I want to suggest here is that you can just do that. You can just set a goal to do that. One of the things you can do is you can just spend time every day and some of this advice is not for the people who are Twitter-pated and goofy in love right now. Some of you who are goofy in love, you don't need to do this. But some of you who are married, and you've been married for a few years, and maybe the goofiness is gone, and now you're in the attachment kind of love, what I'm suggesting here is you can spend time every day of your life, just in the morning or whenever you say your prayers or whatever you do, just sit down and think about all the things you love about your partner or your spouse, right? Why you fell in love with them, the things you admire about them, the things you appreciate that they do. Just all of that. Just think about that in your head and realize how lucky you are to have that person in your life. And as you do that, you start to create some of that positive sentiment override, and it's going to impact how you interact with them. It's going to impact how they perceive you, and it's going to create a lot of benefits for the relationship, right? Okay. Here's another thought. In the same way, like how Gottman said, people go back and they color the origin story. The story of how we fell in love can become negative because everything in the relationship is so negative. I want to say, do the opposite. Take that story of how you fell in love and retell it to yourself on a regular basis. Maybe even get together with your spouse and the two of you share. Here we go, the next bullet. Write your story together. Your perspective and her perspective, or your perspective and his perspective. Come up with a collaborative story of how the two of you fell in love. And maybe as you have kids, on your anniversary every year, tell them the story. Break out the book and here we go, and this is how we met, and this and that. And keep that story alive and allow it to remind you about how much you love your spouse, right? Because people forget. Let's go on. Point number 3. Practice verbal optimism. Okay, so another bit of research that comes from this same researcher, John Gottman. He's trying to predict divorce. He's got couples in a lab, and he's collecting all kinds of data from them. He's got they're being recorded as they have a conflict. They're being interviewed. They fill out surveys, all this data. And he spends years trying to figure out what are the things that lead to divorce and what are the things that don't. And ultimately, he comes up with this pretty complicated algorithm to predict divorce, and it's very successful. He can predict divorce with a 91% accuracy. But at the heart of the algorithm is this really simple ratio, which is just a 5-to-1 ratio of how much positive stuff happens in the relationship to negative stuff. So if you communicate a lot more positive stuff than negative stuff, your odds of getting a divorce are slim. So if you can hit at least a 5-to-1 ratio, you're pretty safe from divorce. If it gets lower than 5-to-1, it starts to become predictive of your chances of divorce increase. So you should express positive feelings in your relationship very freely. You should, and remember we talked about pondering all that stuff. So you ponder it, you spend time thinking about all those things you love about your spouse, and then you tell them. Or all the things you love, well, again, if you probably do tell your boyfriend you love him to death and all that. You say that stuff, right? But later on, maybe we start to forget that stuff. So here's a thought, and it's not love. I just made a mistake there. It's not I love you, but it's fond feelings of admiration. One of the things I really admire about you is, like I remember saying this to my wife like about 7 years into our marriage, and she said, "Really? You've never said that before?" I said, "Like I just really admire like how good you are with managing the money, and you're frugal and you do all this kind of stuff, and it's just I know I can just totally trust you on all that stuff." And she was like, "Oh, okay." And she was really happy I said it, but I just thought, "Wow, I'm a bad husband. 7 years and I never said that to her." Anyway. Here's another thought. The positive feelings are contagious. We've got some pretty good research showing that as you do this, it's going to change the way you behave. You're going to be more positive, and you're going to feel more positive, pondering and then expressing, and then your partner's going to start doing the same and reciprocating, and you'll create a lot of positivity in the relationship, right? So now we can talk about the other part of it, which is the negative feelings. You're going to express them as carefully as you can, as lovingly as you can. You're not going to hopefully ever express things in the heat of the moment, right? Negative feelings are also contagious, so you need to be careful. If you vent and express a lot of negativity, you're going to receive a lot of negativity too, usually. I just wanted to suggest one thing to you to help you out here today. There's lots of things we could say about how to reduce your negativity, but here's one thought. Well, increasing the positivity is the best thing you can do to increase, instead of trying to think, how can I be less negative, just start being more positive. It's like you're on a scales, right? And so as you increase one, the other one's going to go down. So the best thing to do is just focus on how to be more positive. The 24-hour rule. Okay, so the 24-hour rule is this. Sometimes I maybe want to say something negative, but 24 hours later I'll go, wow, that was pretty petty. I'm glad I didn't say that, right? And so I would just encourage you, man, if you think you need to say something really negative, wait a day and see how you feel about it. And even if you still feel like you need to say it, I'll bet you'll say it more lovingly a day later, right? Okay, number 4, speaking the right love language. Okay, so there's this guy named Chapman who wrote a book, and most of you, this is the most common, oh, my phone died? Oh, this is really bad for all of you, because I don't know when this ends now, so. Oh, wait, it came on, sorry. Sorry, here we go, I got it. I think I got it. Okay, all right. Chapman, he wrote this book called Love Languages. There's no research to back this up, but I think it's a great insight. He's basically a therapist, a clinician who, based on anecdotal experiences with his clients, he came up with this theory about these love languages. And what it boils down to is this. We all have a preference for how we want to be loved, how we want people to show us love, right? He's got a bunch of these different options here, right? Gifts. Do you want someone to give you gifts to show you they love you? Do you want someone to spend quality time with you? Words of affirmation. You want someone to actually tell me you love me, right? Acts of service, physical touch. These are the 5 love languages. So here's his point. We have a preference for the one we want, and then we tend to assume everyone else has our same preference, and so that's the way we show love. But what you need to do in a relationship is learn the way, how your partner wants to be loved, and start speaking that language, right? So learn your partner's love language and use it, right? Okay, number 5. I'm got 4 minutes. Okay, this will be fun. Here we go. Traditions. Okay, here we go. Be an intentional couple. The metaphor here with the couple rowing in the canoe. Imagine this. You're in a canoe and you're in the river, and if you don't do anything, you're just going to go downriver. And you're going to, in other words, the forces are going to take your relationship wherever they want it to go. If you take charge of your relationship, you can get to the place you want to get to. If you have a particular dream for the kind of relationship you want to create and the kind of things you want to have happen in it, get intentional about that. Talk about it as a couple and make it happen, right? So here's some thoughts you could do. First of all, create traditions of connection. Date nights, walks, dinner time, screen off time, whatever. Come up with ways in which you will be more connected and work those into your relationship as rituals, right? Regular self-disclosure. Just talk a lot. It's weird, but married couples sometimes after 10 or 15 years don't know a lot about what's going on in each other's lives. Keep those conversations going. Ask those questions like, what are your biggest stresses right now? Or what's the things you're most excited about going on in your life right now? Or, there's a whole bunch of questions that you could be asking each other to stay in touch. Be mindful of bids for connection. Okay, I don't have a lot of time, so let's think about this. Every day in your relationship, there are these little moments in your day where one or the other of you is making a bid for connection. Maybe I tell a joke, and I'm hoping my wife laughs. Maybe she says, hey, do you want to come and help me with the dishes? Right? So there's whatever, these different bids that we make. And the idea is that we need to be mindful of those bids and respond to them and make the connection. In other words, every day there's these opportunities where you could either make a connection or miss the connection. Let me give you an example. Once my wife and I were driving in the car. I asked her about this morning, and she remembered it. She said, yeah, I was really surprised because you actually talked back to me, and it was really neat and all this. And so we're driving in the car, and I think I was driving, and she pointed and said, oh, look at that tree. That's a beautiful tree. And I could have done the caveman kind of like, like grunting, But instead, I looked at the tree, because I just read this book. I looked at the tree, and I said, that is a beautiful tree. That reminds me of the tree that used to be in front of Paul Wright's house. Do you remember that tree? And remember how they cut it down and we were so bugged about that? She says, yeah. And we had this conversation about trees and it was really neat and we connected and it was all wonderful. Now imagine if I would have just said, oh, yeah. And that's not the same thing, right? So anyway, let's go on. I'm running out of time here. Let's see what I really want to talk about. Accepting influence. Okay, guys, you just need to learn to listen to your significant other and take her seriously and accept her influence. Enough said. Let's go on. Here's a thought from Stephen R. Covey in his book, 7 Habits of Effective Families. He gives this metaphor where he says, a plane can be off course. A plane can leave LA airport and fly to New York, and it can be off course 90% of the time, but it can still make it to New York on time. Because the whole time the plane's in the air, the navigator's constantly making these micro course corrections that are keeping it going in the right direction. And it's a nice metaphor for relationships. Because what it means is you don't have to have a perfect relationship. You can mess up and make mistakes, but as long as you have a mechanism in place to get you back on track, you're okay. So I guess that's what all this stuff is about, is negotiate expectations. Decide what you want in your relationship, and then hold each other accountable to that. Hey, we said we were going to have a date night every week when we got married, and lately we haven't been doing it, and we should talk about this because this could be really bad for our relationship, right? That kind of conversation, right? And then another thought is, complaining is good for your relationship, criticism is bad. Criticism is about the person. When you say, you're a lazy slob, that's not very nice. But when you say, hey, you forgot to pick up your socks again, and the home teachers came over and they were on the floor, and I was embarrassed, and you said you wouldn't do this, so we need to talk about this. That's okay. That's good for a marriage. That's the mechanism that keeps you in the course correction mode, right? Conclusions. Okay, here we go. Love and accept your partner as is. Mindfully keep your love alive. Love enough to live that 5-to-1 ratio. Speak the right love language. It's like fireworks. Exciting, huh? Be an intentional couple. Yeah, be an intentional couple in love, and we're done. Okay, there we go.